Moving towards the end of this section then, I thought what I would do is look at the status bar and the scrub controls that we have casually glanced at so far in this course, but in this tutorial we're going to look at both of these functions in a little bit more detail. You'll remember that our status bar is right down here at the bottom right of our user interface, and just noticing our status bar there indicates our cursor is at 0 right at the beginning of our project. Now if we direct our focus over to the bottom left of the user interface, this is where we see our scrub controls. Now what we'll do is we'll get back to our scrub controls in a few minutes time. We'll start off by looking at our status bar, so by directing our focus back over to the bottom right, then as I said a few seconds ago, our cursor position, as you can see, is set right at the beginning. Notice our cursor position can be accessed with the shortcut Ctrl+G, and as we are informed, our cursor position at the beginning is set at 1.1.000. And if we move over to our timeline there and the cursor, then of course there is the confirmation our cursor is set right at the beginning of our project at the moment. Of course, if I want to move my cursor, and we have seen how we do this before, just left click anywhere here, and now we'll see my readout here for where my cursor is updates to 3.4.033. And as expected, down on my status bar, well of course in this field here, this is reflected as well. 3.4.033 is my cursor position presently. Now if I don't want this to read out using this format, well remember how we do this. Come back over here, right click and then drop down to time format and then fly out to the right and choose a different time format that you want to work with. I'm going to go for time and frames. As a consequence, despite my cursor not having moved, it's still in exactly the same position. We now get a different readout to reflect time and frames. Here we can see it indicating 5 seconds along plus 19 frames. And no surprise, down here on our status bar, this readout is mirrored as well. Let's try a different position. I'll move just slightly to the left here. And now we can see my readout is set at 3 seconds and 6 frames for my cursor position. And my status bar is updated to reflect this as well. Now, having a readout of where our cursor position is not the only thing that the status bar allows us to view. It might well be that we've created a range between a left and a right locator on our timeline. Well, it would be useful if our status bar would update and indicate any information about this ranged area. Well, of course we can do this. Let's go to our timeline. I'll left click anywhere here at random and then drag to the right. And now what I've done is I've created a ranged area. And as you can see, I've got a left indicator and a right indicator. And therefore, if I now move down to my status bar, we can see in this first field that this is the selection start. And my left indicator, which of course is the selection start, is set at 2 seconds and 10 frames. Whereas my right indicator, where my range area finishes, well that's set at 7 seconds and 8 frames. Okay, so that's my selection end. And we can see that up here on my timeline. Okay. Very useful. Now we don't just see our start indicator at 2 seconds and 10 frames and our end indicator at 7 seconds and 8 frames. Here, right in the bottom right hand corner, we will see the actual selection range and how long it lasts. And at the moment we can see between our left and right locator that we have a range selection of 4 seconds and 23 frames. Okay, simple enough. Now let me just remove this ranged area. I don't particularly need it now for the remainder of this tutorial. But what we will do then is move down to the bottom left of our user interface where our scrub controls are. And here you see this unusual looking triple arrowed button here with the rate set to 0 at the moment. Now what the scrub control allows us to do is drag either to the right or to the left at varying degrees of speed so that our CTI, our cursor, moves along the timeline so that we can clinically focus in even to the exact frame that we might be looking for. I'll show you what I mean. I'm going to left click on our scrub control here in a second and drag to the right. Notice our rate at the moment is set to 0, and that's because our scrub control isn't moving, i.e. it's static at the moment. But when I drag it to the right in a moment, the closer I get to a rate of 1 being normal speed playback, well, you'll see my CTI just moving to the right, and you'll be able to hear the audio playing back. And because it's not quite at normal playback speed, then the audio that you hear will be just a little bit slower. Okay, I'll left click and drag to the right now. Okay, now I started off by getting close to a playback rate of 1, i.e. normal speed. Not quite, it was 0.95 was it? And then by just moving it to the left a little bit, then I could move my CTI along the timeline but at a much slower rate, allowing me to find an exact frame or an exact audio position should I need to. I'll do this in reverse now, and I'll do it very slowly. So I'll left click and just drag ever so slightly to the left. Here we go. Now we don't have to go slowly, by the way. If I left click and drag to the far right, then you'll see my rate jumps up to 20 times playback speed. And I can do the same thing by going to the left. Okay, simple enough. I'll move it to the right a little bit more. Left click and drag to the right. Okay, now as I say, this is a very useful function to be able to allow us to focus in directly to a particular frame or to a particular beat or millisecond on our audio file. I'll just have a quick play around with it now. I'll drag it to the right and to the left. Here we are. And once you have moved your CTI to wherever you want it to go to, for example, I might want to have taken it to here, 12 seconds and 6 frames in, then notice down on my status bar my cursor position is updated as we would expect to 12 seconds and 6 frames. Okay, so that's a useful run through then, looking at the status bar and how it ties in, should we want it to, with our scrub controls.